We are going to follow the money.
Everything you need to know can be understood with this simple phrase: follow the money. And believe me, that's what's happening.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to College Sports Follow the Money, an all-new podcast diving into the critical issues surrounding the big business of college sports. I'm Andrew Monaco, joined by former president of Texas A&M University and former chancellor at the University of Missouri, Dr. Bowen Loftin, and former vice president and general manager of Fox Sports Southwest, Jon Heidtke. From NIL to the transfer portal and opt-outs, to the college football playoff, conference realignment, and more, we tackle the key issues facing college athletics today and into the future.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money! He's the loudest black man!
We welcome you to episode 72 of College Sports Follow the Money. I know it's been a little while, but we're back. And today's episode, we're going to talk about MMRs and the CFP and RFDs and UNC and let's see what else, SEC. We're going to have a lot of acronyms in this one on this episode, along with Dr. Bowen Loftin, along with Jon Heidtke. I'm Andrew Monaco. And I trust as the weather has been changing and eventually spring's coming, have we all been doing well? Give us an update.
Well, I had flu for a while. So
Ooh.
about two weeks ago, I had a really bad case of the flu. The first time in 22 years I've had the flu. And I was in bed for several days. It was that bad. So that's the worst experience I've had for a while anyway. So I was pretty unhappy about that. I'm over it now, except for a lingering flu cough. Otherwise, I'm okay.
Was that with your flu vaccination or?
Yeah, I had the flu vaccine last year, and my doctor said, well, they did a very bad match. They anticipated a different strain of the flu being prevalent than what actually turned out to be prevalent. So my vaccine may have helped a little bit, but I couldn't tell. I was in bed, 4 days solid, basically. Didn't eat a thing and just not feeling up to it, just sleeping and trying to keep quiet. I got over it, but it was not a pleasant experience, I might say. So it is what it is. I'm just an old man. Come on.
What was awesome is he was well enough, Jon, to come by at halftime of Georgia and to come by at halftime at Arkansas. And that proved to be the impetus to those two home wins at Reed Arena for men's basketball.
And my lack last night was the problem at Mississippi State. I
but I knew Starkville wasn't on your itinerary. I knew that. So that's okay. We'll just go for Saturday in Tennessee. Where do we begin? Should we begin with, as I said off the top, MMR? You're going to hear a lot about this in the next, I'm going to say a couple of years for some schools, depending on when the rights, the multimedia rights for schools. In Mississippi State last night, talking with their play-by-play broadcaster, and he said that Mississippi State just signed a 14-year extension or a 14-year deal. But Dr. Loftin and Jon Heidtke, I think in this day and age and this era of college athletics, I think these MMR rights become even more valuable, and it's the schools that will have superior brands will be the benefactors, will they not?
I'm sure of that, Andrew. The issue for me is how long some of these run. The ACC has been, the ACC has been really, I think, bound up for a long time now with a long-term expiring in 32, I think, media rights deal. And that's caused huge amounts of anxiety, lots of legal issues. And, as I told you earlier before the show, not only we got Florida State and Clemson, legally tangled up with the ACC, UNC has actually been quietly doing their own little see at what can be done legally here with them at a much lower level than the two prominent schools are, but that's going on. And then there's all kinds of possibilities out there, but I worry about to get the best deal. You think you got to go long term. So Jon Heidtke, what do you think about this? How is it that you judge how long to go, maximize your benefit now, but how short to go to guarantee flexibility if the situation improves in terms of your marketability and your brand value.
Well, back in the day, and I'll share with you again, the way we used to look at rights fees at Fox was that about a 10-year window was probably a pretty good lengthy time to get a deal done if you could. Realizing that you'd overpaid for probably the first 3 to 5 years of that process, and that if you'd done your job right, that you start to make it back in years 8 and 9 and 10, you're kind of on the right side of that ship. What happened is, and again, long-term deals in this day and age now, I mean, 10 years is like an eternity. I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised that Mississippi State went that long. I'm sure they've got some outs in there, not understanding how the whole thing works. But I do think, again, the way things are changing right now too, that's going to probably impact the length of those deals. And even a 3-year deal now is probably considered in somewhat ways maybe a long-term agreement as quickly as things change in this marketplace. Now, a 3-year deal, it's really hard because the first year of the deal, you're kind of figuring everything out. Second year of the deal, you kind of get into a little bit of groove. By the third year, you're starting to make, you found that rhythm, but now you're already back renegotiating it. And so you spend your whole third year trying to do that again. So it becomes sort of an endless loop. But I do think a couple of things at 30,000 feet that to discuss on this process is, again, probably all MMR rights now aren't created equal. To Andrew's point, brands are going to be very big to this process. And I think schools that are already in either the Big Ten or the SEC probably have a little bit more value to it too, even if though their brands may not be as valuable. Is the University of North Carolina a better brand than Purdue? I would certainly argue yes. But with the way things are headed, Purdue might be a better vehicle because, again, of the revenue that they're generating and being part of the Big Ten deal. So all those things come into play now through the process. And I think the other thing that's happening is that with schools now having to deal with player salaries and NIL and all these other things is at some point, does it make sense to bring all that in-house? Because, you've got to deal with that. In the old days, it was just, hey, you sold your radio, you had some third-tier TV and some advertising, and it was a streamlined business. Today, there's a lot more nuances in there in terms, particularly as it pertains to where does the NIL come in for these people, and how do they help bring, brands into athletes to help accentuate that relationship. So I think, again, it's going to be an interesting period for them, just like everything else in the college space right now. A lot of disruption, and I think every school is probably looking at it through a variety of different lenses. And I think you'll probably see deals bring things in-house. You'll see schools potentially switch partners, and you'll see extensions probably being at those longer lengths just to give that relationship some time to grow and hopefully allow the rights holder or the buyee to hopefully exploit those rights at some point in time.
Jon, let's say Texas A&M signs a long-term deal. Does that spur Alabama? Does that spur Florida State maybe to speed up the process and say, hey, we saw what they got? Like, does it have a domino effect with other schools, whether or not their rights are coming up, if there's an expiration date for those?
Well, I think anytime you see a new deal, everybody looks at it and says, okay, why don't I have what they have? So I think that opens up for that discussion. So I remember Alabama a few years ago opened up that NIL, bricks and mortar deal as part of their building. And that became kind of part of everybody needs that sort of NIL, sort of bricks and mortar process on their campus. Now, do you need that anymore today? What's going on? You can say yay or nay. But I think, again, if some school gets something that another school doesn't have, all of a sudden they get a little bit more envious and those conversations heat up. And basically they'll say, look, I want to try to, hey, whatever Alabama got, I'd like to make sure that we get that too. So if you're in that rights business, you're always, having to try to stay, one step ahead of those relationships and be prepared to say, we'll do that for you, but can we throw another couple of years on the end of the contract? So you use that as a vehicle or barometer to help negotiate those deals. So you're able to have that dialogue with your partners and see if that makes sense for everybody at the end of the day.
NIL coming in-house, so to speak, right now that the schools can handle it in July, changes some things, doesn't it?
It does a great deal. Does a great deal, Andrew. But I'd ask this question of you and Jon. It's one thing for a school to say, I want to look at 10 years or whatever the number might be for your rights negotiation, but how do you do it at the player level? Arguably, a player becomes valuable, at least in somebody's eyes, maybe 15 years old, something like that these days. I mean, where's it going to start? 14, 15 years old, you begin to look at them a little bit. and they get towards the end of their high school career and it gets pretty serious. They become an agent by then. But then they get to a university, and is it 3 years? I mean, how long do they have it? If it's basketball, maybe it's a couple of years. If it's football, maybe it's 3. So what's the real lifetime of the rights situation for a player versus a university program? Programs go on, so they're not going to start and end, but a player's lifetime of value is somewhat limited, isn't it?
Probably. Again, this goes back to the real definition. What is NIL? You know, again, if it's truly name, image, and likeness, there's only a handful of student athletes that are going to be really able to take advantage of that. NIL and its value is it's again not what we're currently dealing with. NIL isn't what the definition states. I think they're trying to correct all that through all these different mechanisms that are going on right now. But I do think, again, if you were to get an Arch Manning, because again, his value going in there, he's going to have a lot more value than, unfortunately, say a Marcel Reed, who no one really heard of that much coming out of college or coming out of high school. So now, can a Marcel Reed or somebody else like that move up to the top of the front? Absolutely. And get value. But again, to your point, Dr. Loftin, those are going to be very short-term deals. But theoretically, if you get an NIL deal going, that's probably, if I'm that student athlete, I'm probably not going to transfer or not look at the transfer portal there, because I'm getting significantly compensated above and beyond the house settlement or whatever whatever that salary cap is going to be, because this is an addition too. So I think, again, those players that can create that value, if a school can say, hey, I'm going to do a better job at school A than school B does that promoting you, then that becomes something that I think comes into that recruitment process. So again, we talk about UNC and Purdue, not picking on Purdue, but again, with UNC's relationship, you're a great basketball player. You've got Michael Jordan as an alumni. You've got Jumpman there. That's probably something a lot more I'm going to be able to grow my career having that relationship than I would going to Purdue, who doesn't really have that kind of track record or those types of opportunities to offer you if you were playing basketball. No, they've won I don't know if they've won a national championship, but they've been good. But do they have that type of brand that North Carolina does in that space? So all those things come into play when you're talking about that elite level athlete that probably does have a lot of NIL opportunities already circling around him or her before they enroll on campus.
Does it make Purdue say, okay, we may not have the Jumpman brand, but do they do it then throughout the Purdue network and their affiliates and that state of Indiana maybe? Do they kind of localize it? So maybe it's not as much money as what someone may be giving, but do it that way, and then puts the impetus on, let's find the right audience for our athlete.
Yeah, and I think that you saw a little bit of that with Caitlin Clark at Iowa. You know, when she came out, most of her deals were local. Then all of a sudden she explodes on the scene her junior year, gets all that national appearances. Then the state farms and the national sponsors roll in. But I think the University of Iowa did a great job cultivating her brand locally and around the state of Iowa with more Iowa-based sponsors to get that thing off the ground. So again, each school is going to lean into their strengths. You know, Texas A&M, hey, it's the network. You know, here's the Aggie network that we can bring to the table for you. You know, your playing career, even if you're fortunate enough to play at the professional level, it's not going to be that long, but because of what A&M can bring, here's where your business opportunities and growth opportunities will come after your career. So I think, again, every school is going to lean into their strengths on that and try to find ways that differentiate for them that might be a better fit for that particular athlete.
The little bit I know, Dr. Loftin, about NIL deals, one sport does 1-year deal only, renegotiated end of the year, and that number can go up or down. Another sport says this is the 1-year deal, but for 2 years, this is the other aggregate salary. Playing off what Jon was saying and playing off what you were saying, maybe that keeps the transfer down if it's multi-year. But some coaches will want just 1-year deals, and then you're welcome to go, or we renegotiate, but not till after the season. And others say maybe a 2 or 3-year deal. I think that's going to be what each school will then determine how best to approach NIL.
We started off without a lot of coaching involvement, at least at any overt level. That's changing. More and more, the laws and the other practices, rules are allowing more and more involvement by the coaching staff and by maybe a person or persons they've specifically hired to negotiate NIL deals. So I think there's more holistic stuff there. There's also this collective thing. I mean, Every big school has at least one collective out there, and they may or may not be under the control of the institution. And so that's a change right there too. What will they do? And are they going to be focusing on the sport or on individual players? I've seen both kinds of that thing happening. And so I'm not sure we have enough stability yet, Andrew, to be able to say this is the way it is or is going to be. We're going through a transition right now. Next year, or this year, I should say, beginning July 1, assuming that Judge Wilkin does what she says she will do in early April, we're going to have a specific cap on salary that will translate into scholarship numbers, team limit numbers, all kinds of situations here. The rosters will be fixed differently than they have been in the past. So things are changing rather rapidly right now. The real issue I saw recently was at the very end of the Biden administration, 16th of January, a letter came out saying basically that NIL and the payments under the House settlement will be under the Title IX umbrella and must be distributed equally between the female and male athletes. Well, a few days later, guess what happened? That letter got rescinded. And so we don't really have certainty about that. But Judge Wilkin herself made it very clear that her settlement agreement that she was negotiating with the plaintiff and the defendant were not going to be involving any conversations about Title IX. It was strictly under the antitrust umbrella that she was looking at legally, which is appropriate given the way the lawsuit was filed. Kessler made it very clear, the plaintiff's attorney, about why he was doing what he was doing. So they avoided Title IX completely. And then the Biden administration tried to come in and deal with that in a letter way, which just adds to, considerably adds to what the law actually says. And that's now gone. So we don't know where we're going to go with this one right now, but it'd be very difficult, I think, for us to navigate things if there were a true equitable number given to both male and female athletes. Not that females don't deserve it. They certainly do. But it's the earning capacity of the individual sports. Most schools have been working for months towards a goal of around 75% of their payments beginning July 1 of this year going to football, and maybe 15 to 18% going to men's basketball, maybe 3 to 5% going to women's basketball plus baseball, and what little is left over going to all the Olympic sports, basically, the non-revenue sports. So that's been the fixture. Some schools like Texas Tech have already published that. They've made it very clear in a public way what their payment scheme will be. Others not so much that long, but I think that's pretty much been the thinking process is let's figure this out based on the revenue generating capability of a given sport and let it go that way. And if that's the way that things prevail after July 1, we're going to see again a huge chunk of the money going to football players, a reasonable chunk given their numbers, going to men's basketball players, and then a couple of sports, baseball and women's basketball, that can generate revenue for a school, getting what mostly is left over, and just a few $100,000 perhaps going to those sports that are not like track and field, swimming and diving, equestrian, things like that. So I find it's going to be interesting to see how it all settles out here. Then you have other things going on. I've been spending a lot of time, guys, looking very carefully through the published now fiscal 24 contract situation with the Big Ten. So the Big Ten is now published how much money each school in the Big Ten made for fiscal 24. And it's a very complex, lengthy list. We can't go through it in one episode here. We'll probably spend podcast time next time also talking about this, but it delves down as far as ticket sale values. And I was fascinated to see how much ticket sales came in for volleyball in a place like Nebraska, women's basketball in a place like Indiana or Iowa. So you get some interesting nuances about that right there, guys. And there's lots of data here to talk about. we can spend some time not only today but also down the road talking about it. But back to your original point here, Andrew, this is I think a point in time where we don't yet know all the answers. I think people are working towards a specific sort of goal by July 1 to know what they're going to be spending. There'll be tweaks and various variants of that, I'm sure, depending on schools and their decisions about what they want to emphasize sports-wise. But we aren't. But what that doesn't do is talk about NIL specifically. NIL is going to be on top of the 20.5 million that's going out the door each year, or at least the first year, from schools to their players that are currently in place. And we have NIL on top of that. And how schools navigate that space and figure out what additions make sense to them will be somewhat variable, because again, a school like Oklahoma is going to say, well, I'm going to focus some stuff on softball, which is in most places going to be ignored largely from a financial standpoint. Nebraska clearly is going to do that on volleyball. And so there are a handful of schools like that that are going to look at a particular sport and say, we're going to work this, and we're going to find NIL support for athletes there, even if we don't give them much money from our 20.5 million allocation from our athletic budget. We're going to give them some money this way too, to make sure we get the best players, and as you said, keep the best players, keep them out of the portal, keep them local for the time they're going to play. That's what I see happening. And it's going to be a couple of years of a lot of back and forth, and obviously litigation will occur, and litigation could easily upend the ship here ultimately. But that's going to take years to work through. We're talking 5 years plus before litigation that's newly filed is going to be actually resolved.
If there were all the answers to NIL, we'd be out of podcast episodes, right?
Yeah.
We can't have that. We need uncertainty.
we have it, sir. We have it.
Yes, we do. You mentioned earlier about UNC and the ACC kind of going, I don't want to say back channel, but internally looking about leaving. Now, this is a conference through Florida State a year ago, was looking to blow it up. Clemson doing the same thing with their own litigation, if you will, in South Carolina. What is interesting about North Carolina, from a guy who went to the University of Maryland when they were still in the ACC, North Carolina ran the ACC. But in a change of commissioners, that's changed. And I have said this in this day and age. When you used to have the field tilted in your favor, when everybody's equal, you feel cheated. That's what I kind of feel is going on here. But besides that, that was parenthetical and that was commentary. UNC's been coveted by, I know, the SEC when they have talked about expansion. That has been a brand for the SEC. I believe they fit in the Big Ten footprint. We've talked about Florida State before is not accredited. South Florida is the accredited school in that state of Florida. But UNC, we'll see. The ACC seems very fractured at the moment. Would that be a fair assessment of how that conference is at the moment?
I would certainly not argue with that at all. I think the ACC has several big issues. They've lost some teams, obviously. They're trying to retain some teams. They've added teams coveted by the PAC, for example. As you know, the PAC is trying to get up to the 8-team conference level to qualify as a conference under NCAA rules, and they aren't quite there yet. UNLV has been a conversation item there, but so have some of the AAC schools.
And again,
so
UNLV wants everything tilted in their favor to join. Right now, they're getting everything in the Mountain West, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
If you're going to do this, we need exactly what we have to go.
And we're talking about $100 million or more potentially paying out from the PAC to the Mountain West to cover their costs of people leaving and things like that. That's a negotiation right now. We don't know what the answer will be there. But the Mountain West clearly wants to do two things. They want to preserve as much of their history, their heritage of teams as possible. They also want to maximize their revenue, which isn't surprising at all. And they have to also worry, and this is where Jon can comment, I think, appropriately, what is their TV value? Is their brand value enough to generate a better contract circumstance going forward as a Group of Five member than they've had. I can't answer that as well as certainly John can answer, but I think the issue right now is going to be a lot of pressure on the PAC to figure out, can they get a TV deal defined now? UNLV basically said, until you tell us what the deal is, we can't commit. The schools in the AAC, the new ones in the AAC, are saying the same. We don't know what your deal is, PAC. Tell us. So the PAC's under huge pressure, I think, right now to come up with a TV deal. And again, John can help me and us all figure out how likely is it that they can get a deal cut with the TV world without having certainty of who their members are. Is that really feasible, John? And can they really come up with at least a framework of a media rights agreement without really knowing who they've got, and the people who they want won't come till they know what they got? It's just a really complicated little back and forth I see going on.
Well, I haven't studied that one probably as well as you have, Dr. Loftin, but from what I've seen and read on published reports is that I think they pretty know who their 8 teams are, I think are going to be. They're trying to figure out, is it UNLV? They're asking for a lot. Do they try to go poach a Memphis or a Tulane out of the ACC? Or so there's a couple of things. Do even Texas State show up at the end of the mix there? So I don't think any of those schools that they're trying to get to fill that last spot are really going to change the needle one way or another. Published reports say they're going to have multiple television partners. Again, Fox and your legacy guys are interested, and there's probably a streamer out there as well. So again, their time slots are good. West Coast is good. I think people have seen the value of being able to programming those time slots during the course of the football season. So I think they'll get something. But is it going to be 30 million a team? Is it 20 million a team? Is it 12 million a team? It's probably closer to 10 or 12 than it's going to be 30. So I think again that's why they can probably get close, because it's not like they're going to get a Texas or Oklahoma that are really going to drive that rating. So whoever they add, it's going to be probably more half a dozen of one, 6 of another. I don't think it's going to really drive the needle, but I think they're going to get something because their time slots are good. And again, networks are looking to move their viewing ship patterns along that way. And they see that live sports still valuable. And again, in those time slots on the West Coast, there's still value for networks there as well. So they'll get a deal done, but will it be a level that's going to be equal to the Big 12 or the AAC? Probably not.
Octagon is helping do the rights. I think they did the
I think
Big
I saw it. I
10.
read that. Yeah.
Octagon. Yeah. So the Pac-12 has filed 7 applications with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office for the Pac-9, Pac-10. I don't know why that was in there. It's Pac-11, Pac-13, Pac-14, also the Pacific Athletic Conference, and the doubly named the PAC Conference. The Pacific Athletic Conference is what that turns out to be. So Oregon State, Washington State have stayed. They did not go to the Big Ten. Boise State's in, Colorado State's in, Fresno State's in, San Diego State's in, Utah State's in. Now Gonzaga makes it 8, but Gonzaga's only playing basketball. To Dr. Loftin's point, they need a football playing school to get to the NCAA. It's got to be an 8-team minimum to qualify as an FBS conference. And that's why it's the UNLVs and the Memphis and Tulanes. They have rumored South Florida. They've rumored UConn. They've doing all of this, but it's interesting. And there's a little bit of a time frame here. To 2026 is when you have to have the conference settled. And Dr. Loftin, to your point, and it's a great point, we have these schools. Can we add one more? Which one is it? How do you finalize the deal? It really is, you need one for the other, and you can't get the other until you have that one. That's a fascinating move. But it's not the Pac-12 that we remember. I think there's some fans out there who are saying, well, we just throw the Pac name on it, we're going to get this media rights deal. That ship has absolutely sailed when all those Pac-12 schools moved and merged with the Big Ten.
Now, there's a dark horse here, though, guys. It's a dark horse. North Dakota State is waiting in the wings right now to be sucked in to either the Pac or the Mountain West. That's what I would say. What do you think about that?
I tell you, the guys I would take is Texas State. because that gets you in this market. They're great recruiting bed. San
Not bad.
Marcos is an unbelievable recruiting, place to take folks to. And again, you get the right coach in there in a hurry with the talent that doesn't get picked up by A&M in Texas in this footprint. They're going to be they can be pretty powerful. And
So Francione returns to Texas State.
I go all the way to Jim Wacker backers back in the day.
It's his field. It's Jim Wacker's field there.
So they've had a history, and I think again, then every team in that conference, if I'm not mistaken, is state. You could become the
Correct.
state conference,
That's
and so
that's the old big state conference that used to be here in Texas in the old days, along with the Lone Star Conference. John, one of the things, and I know it's not the most important thing there, wouldn't Texas State almost every game start at 9:30?
but they probably could work around that too. But they would be the only central. They'd be only the central time zone team in that conference, right? What you described. So they'd have to get used to it, have some fun with the way they start games, do things along that line. But they've had success in baseball. They could be I think they're a sleeper. They've got 30, 40.
Look, a couple years ago, they had Stanford on the ropes.
Yeah.
At Stanford. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think San Marcos is a great place to recruit to as well. So again, to me, and again, they're going to be jumping at the bits to get there. So again, that probably helps. Again, if I'm a TV partner, the central time zones are probably not that valuable at the end of the day because I've got so many, but it still helps them bringing some schools in and create some more opportunities to play earlier for windows that maybe like a Thursday night game, you could always play Thursday night at Texas State or something like that. I'm spitballing here, but there's some things that I think would be valuable from a TV perspective.
And it seems like this is one of the few times in a conference where the market will matter. So Texas State delivers the state of Texas for the Pac-12. This is where Memphis and Tulane become intriguing to them, right? Because of their markets, Tulane bringing New Orleans. Now, look, Tulane's not a huge needle driver in New Orleans, but I'm not sure that's going to matter. It just gives them that footprint there, correct?
Yeah, that's why I wasn't quite sure what, again, I didn't really see the value that Memphis and Tulane brought to that conversation. But again, there has to be some reason at the end of the day. Maybe that's what Octagon's telling them. So,
well, UTSA guys was the target, I think, of the pack at one point. Probably not this moment because they've said we're staying with the East Coast unless you figure out exactly how you do your deal. But UTSA would certainly have brought Texas. A big part of Texas is not very far from San Marcos, quite frankly, but that they've competed at a pretty high level, guys, in football, and they were knocking at the door a few years ago in terms of football prowess, and I think that's something out there that Texas State probably can't quite claim. Texas State has a broad program, no doubt about that. But if I were sitting out in Washington or Oregon, looking to the east, I would see San Antonio before I saw San Marcos, quite frankly. But I'm not sure they can make that happen. That's just going to be a hard deal to cut. And it's not clear what kind of penalties are involved and things like that. The ACC has put together a pretty elaborate wall about leaving. And that's a wall that's very difficult to get over. I mean, the schools that have already done that are still paying. I mean, look at the debt. I've seen the debt numbers in the Big Ten. You look at what Maryland's debt looks like right now because they're buying their way out. They had to buy their way out of the ACC, and that was a very expensive process. They're not paid for yet.
Which is interesting because they were in debt, and the Big Ten was the lifeline getting out of the ACC.
Exactly. That's what made it possible for them to do it. And they actually borrowed against future revenues before they really got access to the revenues they thought they would be able to have. And they're still paying that bill off. And the filings from the Big Ten schools reveal a lot of detail about the debt those schools have. I mean, half the schools didn't lost money last year in the Big Ten. Think about it. A bunch of them have hundreds of millions of dollars of debt service. They can hide it. The privates can hide it. And even some of the publics hide it by putting the debt service into the university pot itself. But some of the schools reveal very deliberately that here's how much debt we owe for athletic facilities in our particular school. And it's a lot of money in some cases. We're talking over $300 million in some cases of debt. And serving that debt is not trivial. So you got all those things out there. You had a bunch of schools. I mean, Ohio State University lost a pile of money in 2024, fiscal 24, a pile of money. Many reasons for it. They had a reduced home game schedule and all kind of issues like that. But I mean, it was a huge deficit that the supposed national champion here had to lose. Think about that, guys. So it's not trivial how these things work out. And what I've been looking at is just going through very carefully, looking at every school in the conference, and the SEC will be visible to me pretty soon, I think. And we can begin to see some interesting, I think, data about what really is working and not working at these schools. It's not just the conference numbers. I mean, the 75 million a school from the Big Ten sounds big, but there's huge numbers in ticket sales, in sponsorships, and those kinds of things. And there's negative numbers in terms of debt service in some schools, and none in others. It's just interesting how it looks out. Looks to me right now, anyway.
I think the other choices that schools are going to have to make is, you're going to put the money into NIL, you're going to put it into facilities, are you going to expand your football, you're going to stand baseball, you're going to, like, there now are going to be choices, are there not, on campuses about where to devote and how many times you're going to go back to your donors, and what are you going to ask for?
There's almost no doubt in my mind that we're going to see a real departure from facility development. I mean, A&M is touting now a couple of things they need pretty badly in terms of baseball in particular. I understand that there'll be examples like that out there for a while, but I really think that everything is shifted away from give me money for facilities to give me money for Texas Aggies United. Give me money for NIL stuff right now, for collective cases. And we have also this cost-cutting thing going on in some schools, preparing for that 20.5 million per year and going up over time number they've got to match out of their budget to actually pay the athletes they have in place. And they're going to lose money for a while from NCAA because of NCAA scarfing money out of the schools that they were going to give them to pay their $2.8 billion for the past history of NIL not being present. So there's a lot going on, folks, right now, and it's not just money coming in; it's money going out, and how to balance all that. But you're right, Andrew. I think that NIL, if not in every school, it's quickly moving towards the most prominent role for donor approaches over and above facilities right now. And I was a guy over with Jon watching the Graham Athletic Complex being dedicated the other day. So
2025, it's going to be the same in the college football playoff. But in 2026, there's talk of expanding to either 14 or 16 schools for that. Right now seems to be set on 14 if there's a change. And if it is 14 teams, one of the rumors out there is that there will be 4 SEC schools, 4 Big 10 schools, 2 ACC, 2 Big 12, 1 at large, and if Notre Dame is ranked highly enough, that would be the 14th school. Also out there, there's talk of going to 9 conference games. Again, not next year. It would have to be 2026 at the earliest, because the SEC is going to change its scheduling. They've locked into 2 years. You're just swapping home and away with your opponents, although the non-conference could change. So possibly going to 9 conference games in the SEC. And then the other talk, because the SEC and Big Ten are driving the CFP, you could see rivalry games between the 2 conferences. Now, I know there are schedules that are locked in, and I also know that you can get yourself out of some schedules down the line, but for the most part, 6 to 8 to 10 years, you know you're non-conference. But that becomes really intriguing of not just expanding the playoff, where if it's 14, the top 2 seeds would get the bye, and then 3 through 14 would play, and then you move on from there. But if you're adding a non-conference between the SEC and the Big Ten, that could be a great way to kick off the season, is Texas A&M at Wisconsin, or Ohio State's at Alabama, right? I mean, it's something that's really intriguing that almost plays hand in hand the beginning of the season or the non-conference as well as the CFP at the end of the season.
Well, one question for you, Jon. What's it worth to have one more conference game to go from 8 to 9? What's that worth to an ESPN? And the other question is, what's it worth if I can set up a head-to-head between the Big Ten and the SEC for either the opening weekend or at some appropriate points during the season there, to give me a marquee game between these two massive, very successful conferences. What's that worth with ESPN or a Fox or one of the other TV providers, an Amazon or a Netflix or whoever wants to go after it?
At 30,000 feet, it's worth a lot. And I'll give you some math to get me there. So the last two seasons, all right, the top 20 rated games, all right, had the most television viewers on those. Of those 80 teams that participated, 65 of those were in the SEC and the Big Ten. All right. Of those 40 games, only 2 did not feature an SEC team or a Big Ten team. Do you want to guess in the last 2 years which those 2 games might have been?
Well, Notre Dame, probably.
Not
Mr. Monaco, your guess?
Not Notre Dame. Which are the 2 that did not have SEC?
Yeah, SEC or Big Ten. Top 20 rated games, last 2 seasons.
Something out of the ACC.
Congratulations, you don't advance to the bonus round either. Coach Prime and Colorado State was one. The other, the classic Army-Navy game. This was last year. All right.
That makes sense.
Having said that, what you say now, anytime you can match up an SEC and a Big Ten team, that's going to guarantee you probably a top 20 rating for that game each season. All right. So that's got immediate value right there. All right. So a couple of other things I want to share with you. We talk about the legacy guys that are in there. Walt Disney, ESPN. Okay. They're the primary factor behind the SEC. Their capitalization, market cap right now is about $200 billion. All right. The other big player out there right now is Fox and NBC, because they kind of share the Big Ten. Fox is only 25 billion and Comcast is 140 billion. All right. So again, you're not talking chump change here. All right. The NFL sold 2 games to Netflix this past year for $150 million. All right. For the Christmas Day game. Netflix is market cap right now is 444 billion. So got a significant amount of revenue there. But Netflix, even though they would be the leader in the clubhouse with that kind of market cap right now, pales in comparison to our friends at Amazon, Google, and Apple, which are all over $2.2 trillion market cap. So if you can create a series of special events, this ACC or this SEC Big Ten showdown, and is that one weekend? Is that 2 weekends? Is that over Thanksgiving? Is that to start Labor Day? You know, you look at different things there. All of a sudden, you've got a nice package of games that you could go take out to the marketplace and to a Netflix or an Amazon. And at $150 million per game, I'm not saying that that's what they'll get for, I mean, if you took the 2 games, it's 75 million, but if that becomes a 10-game package, whatever it looks like, significant amount of revenue there involved in that. So if I'm the SEC right now, I'm arguing with ESPN right now, well, if we have the 9th game, are you going to pay me more? They're probably saying, no, they're not right now. But if you pull those games out and now I'm offering a second package out there, my guess is ESPN is going to be very interested in that type of thing. So I think what the Big Ten and SEC are doing is, I think it makes sense, is that's creating more of those valuable games. We talk about brands. Would you rather watch A&M play Wisconsin or A&M play? I don't even know who the non-conference schedule is this year, but probably that series. And you can carve it up in a way and schedule it in a way that it now creates those special big game type events that a Netflix and Amazon and some of those other folks want to get into to get their toe continually wet in that space before they want to go in and buy a full season package right now. They said they haven't wanted to do that. Because of Netflix's involvement with the NFL this last year, and they've been very reluctant or coy about what their sports plans are. And you may have seen this, guys, last week in an article that came out. Netflix has had a programming said we'd be very interested in the NFL Sunday package. Okay,
they want CBS's or
all of a sudden,
Fox's
if I'm
package.
Roger Goodell and at Park Avenue, my cash register starting to ching, ching, ching right here because I want to see to jump out of that deal. Now, think about the Sunday night or the Sunday games packages. Right now, that's our friends at CBS and Fox. And if you're looking at Fox at a $25 billion capitalization and CBS at $8 billion versus a Netflix at 444, Is that really good move for your shareholders to sit there and overpay for that NFL? Could be a very interesting thing that's going to happen there. But it just shows you where the money is, which is what we talk about all the time on this podcast, is that those types of things and creating those marquee matchups are exactly what those big players at the in the streaming world want. And once they kind of dip their toe in it and see the value it brings to them in terms of reducing churn and new customers into their ecosystem, they're going to, once they have a taste of it, they're going to want to have more. So I think, again, I think that's a brilliant move between the Big Ten and the SEC to see if they can, figure out what that looks like, to A, leverage their existing partners to pay them more or help them get to that ninth game. And B, again, if they come up with it, I think it's going to open up more of that streaming world coming into that marketplace, which is what you want for the next time your rights come up. That's going to create even more value when it's all said and done. So again, I think it's a brilliant idea what they're trying to do, and I think that makes a lot of sense. It's going to create more value across the conference and create, again, even more value for the playoffs too, because now you're getting some of these playoff matchups early in the year, and hopefully you get you'll get a rematch of some of these or similar matchups later in the year with the CFP.
Dr. Loftin, it dovetails with what you're talking about. If a school is dealing with debt and a school has to pay $20 million every year because of the House settlement, then something like this makes sense. That's why a couple episodes ago, could TV help defray some of those costs? Well, with this package, it could help defray some of that and the debt
it's the
as
only
well.
place to go. I mean, where else are you going to go? Your value in your athletic program among the schools in the SEC and the Big Ten has never been greater right now, and it's going to get even bigger as time goes on. And John's exactly right. If clever people sit down and figure out exactly how to make these things work out, it's not just these games between the SEC and the Big Ten. It's also going to a 14 or a 16 team. The 14 team growth probably won't generate more revenue in and of itself, but a 16 team would, wouldn't it, John? You don't think a 16 team would generate more money?
Under the current scenario, ESPN's paying $1.3 billion for the CFP package as it stands from 26 to 31. And the way I understand it, and if they go from 12 to 14 to 16, there's really no money. Now, can they renegotiate that? Absolutely. So that probably comes part of all the chips that they're talking about. What does this look like as we go forward? And if you may remember, in the CFP, ESPN has the rights to sublicense those games, so they might be able to get more money via sublicense for some of these extra games too. So it does create a larger value proposition at the end of the day to certainly bring to your television partners and have some more intriguing options to put on the table for them.
And again, if you look beyond football to men's basketball, you see some big numbers out there as well. There's some sizable numbers. When you consider what it costs to run a college basketball team versus a football team, and you can bring in 15, 20 million a year of even ticket revenue on basketball. Think about it. Even ticket, not counting your shares in the NCAA tournament. And then you offset that against a $3 million coach. And you begin to see that there's a pretty good profit margin possible there for you. You've only got a dozen players to worry about. You don't have 85 players to worry about. It's a very different kind of world. And your NIL becomes different there too, because the NIL can be very focused in a situation with that fewer players anyway. So I think there's a lot of possible scenarios here to work through that not just involve football, but also involve men's basketball especially. And then you have these sort of special situations with volleyball at Nebraska or softball at Oklahoma that give you the advantage of bringing in extra millions right there for little cost. What I found very fascinating was a study done looking at the coaching salaries in football vis-a-vis their success. And there's a correlation, gentlemen, not surprisingly. If you pay the big bucks for the coaches, not every case, but in general, and look at the win record, guess what? It shows that money did produce wins. It's not in every case, but on the average, the actual investment at a high level in a $10 million coach will pay off in terms of your win. And if your win gets you to the CFP, gets you to where you want to be in terms of a specific scenario that generates revenue for you, that's a pretty good deal right there. And I think men's basketball, as they try to figure out how to manage the tournament better, and perhaps women become much more of a player in terms of the women's tournament here, and revenue generation. There you have a lot of different threads that bring money into your program, and that's what I think clever ads and their staffs are working on right now, is how to weave together all these threads of revenue to offset the 20.5 million I'm going out the door now to my players, to offset facility debt payments, which many schools have for a long time to come, and how that's going to really work out. So I think you need to have an extremely clever team, an AD and a team at their level that really understand the revenue potential of their products, I should say, plural, and how to maximize that. And it's not going to get any easier, guys, but it's going to get, I think, a little bit richer in some respects as this thing goes forward. As John said, there's a lot of things here that have been put together in terms of sub-licensing and things like that can produce really good revenue. And I think it's going to be an interesting process for us as a podcast to keep an eye on that over the next several months to years and be able to comment on it. So I'm looking forward to it, guys.
Those will be fun. Those will be fun. The day and age of the old AD is not the same. The day and age of a head coach is not the same. And if you've got to change along with the times, don't you?
Oh, yeah. I remember all too well when the head coach was automatically what? The AD as well.
The AD.
And how much time?
That's how you justified the $1 million salary, right?
How much time went into that? That's the question.
That was always the question. Bill Parcells said, what was the line about the groceries? Bill Parcells said, I want to be able to buy them. If I've got you, I've got to be able to buy the groceries as well. But I don't think you can do both jobs any longer. I really don't. And I mean, I know I'm talking NFL. You can't do it there. And in college, you've got to adapt. And to your point, Dr. Loftin, it's that type of thinking moving forward. And I don't even want to say a 21st century AD, because just in the first quarter of this century, it has changed now in 2025 for sure.
So John, what do you think about all the NFL deals going on right now with non-traditional, those who not traditionally have not aired that much sports? Is that going to migrate to football in the college level and men's basketball in the college level the same way it's migrating through the NFL right now? Do we see that happening over the next few years?
When you say migrating, meaning like games going to Apple and Netflix and whatnot?
Amazon, Apple, Netflix, picking up a college chunk of some type makes sense.
These Netflix streaming, Netflix, Prime, none of these guys grew their business on the backbone of sports. Okay. That was all. They were already in another business, and now they're looking to see, where does sports potentially fit into my programming lineup, and where does it bring me more value in terms of how do I can keep my subscribers happy? How do I keep adding subscribers? How do I reduce my churn? All right. If you go back and look through the history, I mean, one of the things that the Fox Broadcasting Network, the reason it became into existence was they, in the still of the night, got all the games from CBS. Murdoch moved them all over, and that allowed the Fox Broadcasting Network to become the fourth network back in the 90s. ESPN would be nothing today if it wasn't get their first NFL deal way back in the mid 80s, to bring that onto the mix, to give them the legitimacy. They needed sports. The broadcasters need sports because it delivers the highest number of audience eyeballs out there. If you look at the top 100 most watched events on TV the last several years, 95 to 98 have been sporting events. The majority of those on the big networks that were big games, the World Series, basically every NFL game, etc. So they need that content. Right now, the streamers don't. But what the leagues are doing, which I think are creative, was they said, Prime, we're going to give you the Black Friday game, after Thanksgiving. All of a sudden, that really helped them grow their business, because they probably did unbelievable amounts of not just watching the football game, but selling Christmas gifts on that Black Friday, or the e-commerce that they went through. I mean, Netflix, not really interested in sports, picks up the Christmas Day game, sees how much that helped their overall viewership, promoting new programming, seeing what happens when they're talking about movies and shows that nobody had any idea were, but because they were watching the NFL game, they said, hey, I want to see that show again. So that happened for them. So now, already with just that 1 year under their belt, their head of programming, I mean, she didn't say it just flippantly. They said they want the Sunday package coming up. So that's big if you're in the sports broadcast. So we know that if you can create big events like that till those streamers kind of see the value of it, then it makes sense for them to pull into a league, or there are opportunities there to say, look, if we have the Sunday night NFL package and they get another sporting event, that's for the other MLB package, for instance, they got programming year round in sports, the time marquee stuff, which is going to help them in terms of their other business initiatives, in terms of subscriber churn or whatever that it is. So you got to get those guys into the game first to see that it's meaningful for them. And once they dip their toe into that water, then hopefully they're going to dive in. And I think the Netflix model that the NFL is working is showing how brilliantly that worked. And again, Black Friday for Prime now is they have the Thursday night game of the week. That was really, when the NFL created that was not a very good schedule. It was more to help the NFL network kind of get its feet off the ground. Fox did it as a favor to the league to carry it. Everybody wanted to get out as quick as they could. Along comes Prime. Now the NFL gives them better games, and all of a sudden that's part of the Prime network programming staple. So again, as these streamers get into that world, they're going to see and understand the more value of sports, and what better way to get those marquee games in a Big Ten and SEC type of challenge could really, really, really bring them value. And again, create more value for the leagues and more leveraging, for the conferences as they sit down with their TV partners. Greg Sankey wants to get more money for a 9-game schedule by able to kind of put that other schedule there. If I'm ESPN, I'm to the table pretty quick saying yes to that and finding to make that work. So those are all things that I think that are happening right now that, if you look to, are all going to benefit the ecosystem of collegiate sports in terms of creating more value out there. But you got to have the good games. You can't put A&M and New Mexico State on and expect to get that kind of. Netflix will not want that. No one wants that. SEC Network, maybe, because it gives them content. But those marquee matchups, those brands are what's going to drive that acceleration, if you will, into the streaming world. That, and being able to have content to offer them, because most of their TV contracts are wrapped up into the early 2030s.
You think we're at the cusp of having the SEC announce a 9-game conference schedule, sir?
I mean, I've been a fan of the 9-game schedule since
since
it's happened. So again, I know the league was trying to get more money from ESPN. ESPN was reluctant to give them more money. So you're kind of in that, in that sort of holding pattern. But I think this would tip the leverage in terms of those negotiations to kind of, if you can create that SEC challenge, Big Ten challenge, you have to go to 9 games. So I think part and parcel of that leads into the CFP with the 14 teams. And let's say you're guaranteed the 4 spots. The first thing I heard of that, my first thought was, well, boy, that sounds like an entitlement, and that's going to be a hard sell to the general public. But if you look back the last 10 years and you were able to take the top 4 teams, there were 4 in the, there always usually 4 in the SEC or 4 in the Big Ten that were already in there. So you're really not, changing the dynamics that much. It just sounds like entitlement, which I think, again, which will be something that they'll have to figure out, and how to navigate through that conversation. Because I think, again, the early public perception on that is probably negative toward the 2 big boys. But if you look at it at the end of the day, that's probably what would have happened anyway over the last 10 years anyway. So again, some of it you got to manage the message, and I think those 2 conferences can do a pretty good job of that because of the additional games that they're bringing. And think about if you're buying season tickets and you're trying to raise money to pay for NIL, what that does for you too. I mean,
in that year that you only have the 4 home games and 5 away, right, in conference, do you get the home game against the Big Ten? Now, the message to the other conferences is you all aren't playing 10 conference games. Basically, that's what you're doing. 9 plus the Big Ten or 9 plus an SEC. No other conference is going to be able to match that. So when you go to just like strength of schedule, RPI, net, whatever you want to use, it's going to be unmatched.
You're there, right?
Again, still, if you're jealous of the SEC and the Big Ten, you're going to look for anything, right? To your point, John, the entitlement. But I've always said this. Everybody who says, about the SEC doesn't have to run the gauntlet in football and basketball and baseball and all the sports. They don't. So it's easy to say that because look at basketball. This is unbelievable. 9 of the top 25 teams are ranked. Yeah. It's just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing, one of the other people that will say, no, well, I'm losing a home game and that's costing me money. Well, that home game you're losing is going to be, I'm sorry, I pick on New Mexico State, but if you look at that ticket prices drops, they're doing giveaways. So you're going to make more money bringing in, having a less game because your other games are going to be more valuable. And I'm sure the economics of that are going to be, there'll be a plus at the end of the day by dropping a game. And does that give you another day to potentially do something with your stadium to bring another thing to make some more revenue to at the end of the day? So they're all things that you've got to kind of factor into that mix, but it's all leaning toward here, trying to create that greater value that your media partners are going to want to pay for because those are marquee matchups.
The answer, guys, is very simple. Let's simply get rid of the 6-game requirement to be in a bowl and replace it with strength of schedule. And we'll be okay. We'll be okay with it.
Yeah,
that's been one of the arguments against it, of course. Oddly, this year I got my renewals for my season tickets for football, and there was no price increase. Then I realized it's still 7 home games. And my wife said, okay, we're going to Notre Dame, aren't we? So we're going to Notre Dame, guys.
That's week 3, by the way.
I'm taking the train.
Are you?
Well, the 12-Man Foundation has put together a Chicago South Bend private train trip for the fans going from in their program.
Podcast
so my wife
idea.
bought into that big time.
Podcast idea, doing the show.
Looking forward to being right next to you, sir.
I'm looking forward to that. I'm not going to lie. I'm looking forward to it.
I've been to South Bend a lot, but not football yet. No, my first time to watch a football game at that stadium. So I'm looking forward to it a lot.
I'll share a bit of trivia. I went to a Notre Dame game when I was living in Chicago, and the next day they put up, or they were telling us during the game, and said, hey, come back tomorrow and you can be in the stands. We're filming a movie. The movie was Rudy. So somewhere Sandy and I are in the stands because we went before we went back, but we've never found ourselves there, but we were actually in the movie.
You were an extra. You were an extra, sir. Think about it.
Are you on IMDb?
I was trying to see because they didn't say just come back in and sit and be part of the crowd. So yeah, so that was fun.
How cool
place for a game.
Say that again, Dr. Loftin.
Residuals for that.
Residuals? You got residuals for Rudy?
Yeah.
People forget this too. I know Nick's going to probably cut all this out, but you know who played the quarterback that was the highly recruited quarterback that did the season pan out and he threw the touchdown pass at the end of the game to get Rudy in? You know what actor played that guy in the movie?
Who was that?
Vince Vaughn.
Amazing.
This is our best episode ever.
It's been fun, guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Certainly has. Dr. Loftin, thank you. Jon Heidtke, thank you. I'm Andrew Monaco. Our thanks to Nick Savage as well. collegesportsftm@gmail.com. If you have a question, we can answer that in an upcoming episode. Until the next time, we thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you, everyone.